lo atiendan y que pues apliquen los derechos humanos con él. No estamos pidiendo algo otra cosa, solamente lo...
That was the wife of Joaquin Guzman, aka El Chapo, appealing to the United States government to give her husband better prison treatment. El Chapo was sent to the deadliest prison in the US back in 2016. No one, and I mean no one, enters this prison and makes it out the same, if they even make it out. But amidst all this chaos, the real question we should be asking is, how on earth did the notorious El Chapo end up behind these walls? Vantage point. Back in the 90s, El Chapo was considered one of the greatest drug lords of all time, after Pablo Escobar, of course. He raked in $3 billion annually from running a narcotics empire in Mexico. He was a co-founder of the famous Guadalajara cartel, before forming his own organization, the Sinaloa cartel. But after the death of a Catholic cardinal was linked to his organization, El Chapo was arrested for the first time on June 9, 1993 by the Mexican army. This arrest was the point where his story gets interesting. El Chapo was sentenced to 20 years in prison on different charges. He was to serve this sentence in a federal maximum security prison in Mexico. But when a man has a lot of money and influence like El Chapo did, you come to realize that he can't be held down so easily. In 2001, El Chapo escaped prison with the help of a compromised prison guard, Francisco El Chito Camberos Rivera, who took a $2.5 million bribe from El Chapo to organize a laundry cart to conceal and wheel him out of the building. Now, if you just think about that a second, doesn't it sound weird that a random laundry cart would get wheeled out of a maximum security prison without anyone raising an eyebrow? Well, the other side of that story is that El Chapo had virtually every prison guard under his payroll, including the prison facility's director. To put it mildly, El Chapo was in control of the entire facility. Shenanigans. After his escape in 2001, the United States of America was on his radar. He was indicted in San Diego on U.S. charges of money laundering and importing tons of cocaine into California, along with his Sinaloa attorney, Humberto Loya Castro, who was charged with bribing Mexican officials on Sinaloa's behalf, making sure arrested cartel members were released from custody. But again, El Chapo was so powerful he couldn't be caught easily. By 2014, the Mexican Navy, the DEA, and U.S. Marshal Service had formed a triple threat team tasked with one goal in mind, and that was the capture of El Chapo. On February 22, 2014, their goal was actualized after joint intelligence was able to track down El Chapo's movement, leading to his arrest around 6:40 a.m. He was then transferred to the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, a maximum security prison in Almoloya de Juarez, State of Mexico, on a federal police Black Hawk chopper. Surveillance inside the penitentiary and surrounding areas increased by a large contingent of law enforcement just to make sure there was no escape for El Chapo this time. But this man named El Chapo proved once again that there was no stopping him. On July 15, 2015, El Chapo once again escaped his prison cell in one of the most brilliant prison breaks we've ever seen, embarrassing the likes of Schofield with the help of his wife by organizing men on the outside to dig up a 1.5-kilometer-long tunnel from a construction site right to the shower area of his cell. The tunnel was well equipped with artificial light, air ducts, and high-quality construction materials. In addition, they also found a motorcycle in there, which authorities think was used to transport materials and possibly Guzman himself. At this point, everyone had had enough of El Chapo shenanigans. The Mexican government, the DEA, everyone, and it was time for the U.S. to step in harder. The DEA fought for his extradition to the United States, and after his third arrest on January 8, 2016, El Chapo was booked on a one-way ticket to the ADX Florence Supermax prison, a miniature version of hell.
That system basically just depersonalized me and made me into a thing. And then what happens is you become an animal or you become your own worst enemy.
Beginning of the end. From the moment El Chapo stepped foot on American soil, you could see the terror in his eyes. He knew without a doubt that this was the end of the road for him. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years to be served in ADX Florence. The ADX Florence, located in Colorado, is a 37-acre Supermax prison that houses some of the most ruthless criminals of our time. These guys are straight-up monsters, having no interest in money or power. All they want is to see people suffer in the most sadistic ways. Now, El Chapo, just like other inmates, is kept in solitary confinement 23 hours every day. They're only allowed 1 hour of outside time. In this free hour, inmates aren't allowed to see or talk with other inmates. They're left alone with their thoughts, which, from what past inmates say, is a very horrifying experience.
It means you're in your cell for 23 to 24 hours a day, by yourself. You're let out for an hour in an underground concrete pit, where you can't see into the distance. If something is bothering you, you can't talk to anyone, you can't text anyone, you can't, shout at anyone. You just have to be alone with your thoughts and toss and turn till the morning.
Also, during the hour of free time, inmates are highly supervised and are kept in chains so they can't run, jump, or attempt anything funny. Obviously, there aren't any phones allowed, no gym equipment, or anything inmates can turn into weapons. They're allowed to read books and watch a small black and white TV. But this type of luxury is only available to inmates that have demonstrated good behavior over time. El Chapo's allowed this privilege. His cell is constantly paroled by guards who, according to El Chapo's lawyer, never allow him to sleep. Each cell contains a desk, stool, and a bed, constructed almost entirely of poured concrete, as well as a toilet that shuts off if blocked, a shower that runs on a timer to prevent flooding, and a sink without a tap. Inmates are allowed to shower 3 times a week, and while they go shower, their legs are chained as an extra security measure. In El Chapo's room, there's a tiny 4x4 window designed to prevent him from knowing his specific location within the complex. He can only see the sky and roof, so it's virtually impossible to plan an escape. He can exercise in a concrete pit resembling an empty swimming pool, also designed to prevent him from knowing his location. The pit is large enough only for him to walk 10 steps in a straight line or 30 steps in a circle. Correctional officers generally deliver food to El Chapo and other inmates in a small window of 15 minutes, while a prison guard watches from afar with a loaded rifle. This guard is permitted to shoot first and ask questions later. Sounds a little sick to me. But with all these measures, how is the American government and the Federal Bureau of Prisons so sure there's no way El Chapo can escape the Supermax? Well, the answer to that question lies in the fact that not only is inside the prison a fortress of security, but on the outside is also a minefield of death. And what I mean by that is, the prison's external areas have a multitude of motion detectors, cameras, and 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors. Officers in the control center monitor inmates 24 hours a day and can activate a panic button, which immediately closes every door in the facility. Should an escape attempt be suspected, pressure pads and a 12-foot razor wire fence surround the perimeter, which is patrolled by heavily armed officers. Even though these measures are more than enough to hold down these prisoners, the security at ADX doesn't end there. There's a small town right down the road named Fort Carson that's home to a 4th Infantry Division, 10th Special Forces Group, a couple hundred combat vehicles, and 74 combat choppers. It would take 2 battalions of soldiers to break El Chapo out of this prison. So just like everybody else who has toured this prison, I believe it's impossible for El Chapo to break out, and I'll put my money on it. The only way he can actually leave the ADX Florence is if this happens. The loophole. As insane as the security is at ADX, many human rights activists believe the conditions are too harsh for a person. After all, even criminals are still human beings. But what these activists fail to understand is that ADX Florence wasn't built for every criminal. In fact, it was built after 2 prisoners, Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain, members of the Aryan Brotherhood, fatally stabbed correctional officers Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman at the United States Penitentiary, Marion. The stabbings took place only a few hours apart and were blamed on inadequate prison design. This forced the hand of Federal Bureau of Prisons Director Norman Carlson to propose a new facility to isolate the most dangerous, uncontrollable inmates for security and safety. And voila, the Supermax was born on January 10, 1995. As of now, there are currently about 300 plus inmates at ADX Florence, including El Chapo. But also like El Chapo, the inmates at ADX Florence are top-tier criminals. For one, there's Ramzi Youssef, convicted in 1994 of terrorism conspiracy and other charges in connection with the '93 World Trade Center bombing, which killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. Youssef was also convicted in '96 of planning Project Bajinka, a foiled plot conceived by senior al-Qaeda member Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to bomb 12 planes in a 48-hour period. Then there's Umar Abdul Muttalab, a Nigerian national and al-Qaeda operative in the Arabian Peninsula who pleaded guilty in 2011 to attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction for trying to blow up Northwest Airlines Flight 253 from Amsterdam to Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. He was nicknamed the Underwear Bomber as the bomb was sewn into his underwear. And then there's El Chapo's own cousin, Alfredo El Mochomo Beltran Leyva. Alfredo was a business partner of El Chapo's and was also the leader of the Beltran Leyva organization that operated out of Sinaloa, Mexico. Between the 1990s and 2000s, Beltran Leyva was responsible for the wholesale shipment of cocaine and methamphetamine between the United States, Mexico, and South America. On November 15, 2014, Beltran Leyva was extradited to the U.S. to face trial for shipping at least 27.9 tons of narcotics in there. Then on February 23, 2016, Beltran Leyva pled guilty to charges of international narcotics trafficking conspiracy and was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 50 years in 2017. Beltran Leyva was also ordered to forfeit $529 million in profits made from his organization. These are just 3 of the hundreds of extremely dangerous criminals at the ADX Florence. And to some extent, you can argue that they deserve the severity of punishment they're receiving. But at the same time, there are a few criminals who may not have committed a crime as high profile as these guys, but are still kept in ADX Florence. An example is this guy.
Self-defense. I had issue with another convict, and it went all the way. I'm not proud of it, I'm not happy about it, it's just something done. I don't regret it neither. I did what I felt I had to do. I'm not a kill freak or anything.
On top of these, there have been a lot of controversies regarding the effect of such measures on human beings. For instance, since ADX opened its doors in 1995, 8 different inmates have committed suicide within the premises. Also in 2012, 11 inmates filed a federal class action suit against the Bureau of Prisons. The suit alleged chronic abuse and failure to properly diagnose prisoners who are seriously mentally ill. At the time of the lawsuit, only 6 inmates had allegedly died by suicide. Critics claim that the use of extended confinement in solitary cells adversely affects prisoners' mental health. Numerous studies support this conclusion, and so do the inmates.
In a statement to Vice News, the BOP said they avoid releasing inmates directly from restrictive housing back to the community, and that when necessary, they provide targeted re-entry programming to prepare the inmate for his return to the community.
Prisoners held in Unit H, which is El Chapo's unit, are subject to special administrative measures that prevent them from communicating with journalists or privately with their own lawyers or family members. These are some of the changes El Chapo's wife and lawyer are fighting for. A prisoner named Jabbar Currents, who's a former inmate of ADX, had this to say when talking about the effects the confinement had on him.
I got borderline personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, a cyclical mood disorder, bipolar, antisocial personality disorder.
So, like I was saying, the only way El Chapo can actually leave this Supermax prison to a lesser maximum security prison is if his lawyer's appeal gets answered. Now, of course, El Chapo's currently on his best behavior, but the likelihood of his appeal getting accepted is close to 0. However, in a few years, if he continues to demonstrate good behavior, he might get sent to a lesser prison, just like almost every prisoner at ADX Florence. So maybe El Chapo by some miracle gets transferred to a lesser max prison. Maybe he doesn't. But the fact still remains that there is no way on God's green earth for El Chapo to escape the ADX Florence Supermax prison.
We don't ask them to come here. With their misbehavior and management problems, they earn their way here.